Elizabeth Law, it is an absolute privilege to speak with you this evening. Thank you so much for making the time on what has to be an undoubtedly busy schedule.
Thank you. It was a really hectic day today, but who isn't having a hectic life right now?
Yeah, I've been homeschooling all day and doing 20 other things.
Yeah, work is, everything takes twice as long during the pandemic. There's no just sticking your head over somebody's cubicle and asking a quick question and getting it handled, or, poking your head in somebody's office and bouncing an idea off them. Everything takes steps.
You've got to do, I'm assuming, messages and Zoom meetings all day long?
Yep. And I typed out what I thought was a very short and very clear email about something. And I'm going to say this publicly, designers I knew never read. They're so visual. But I didn't realize production people, as soon as I brought up the book, instead of reading it, they were like, wait, that book's not coming out till, and I'm like, I said that in the email, anyway. So there's a lot of, not everybody is a natural at communicating over email. Maybe we in editorial and the readers are good at that, but it takes a little extra work.
Oh, I think, just speaking from my experience, that I am also bad sometimes with email. I'll read it and then forget it a moment later. If I had more than an hour passes after the time I read it, I'll have read 20 things since then.
Well, right. That's easier when you work in an office, because you can just actually get stuff done really quickly. It's the whole point of an open plan office, I think, is you can yell over the wall at somebody, get an answer, and move on.
So are you completely remote at this point?
Yes, New York City publishing in general is completely remote. I know most of the biggest houses have announced they're not going back till at least January. At Holiday House, we're working on a plan where people who would like to go to the office can go on a rotating schedule. Things have been X'd out with tape so that nobody's too close. And if I went in 1 week, I couldn't go in the next week, things like that. And I would like that. I'm super extroverted. I'm amazed I lasted this long working from home. So it's taken all my tools. So I'll be glad when I can work a couple of days a week in the office.
Hopefully sooner rather than later, knock on wood and all that good stuff.
Yep.
So probably usually the best place to get started is what I try never to do, is to summarize your biography with you sitting right there, because I'll get it wrong and we'll both know I'm wrong, and it'll just be awkward.
Yeah, and I like to talk about myself. The one thing about my career that's slightly unusual is that when I was in high school, the librarian in my town, which was Belmont, Massachusetts, she and I founded a children's book discussion group. So every other Wednesday we met. There were books that were assigned that we would share copies of, and then we would talk about them. And this was the late 70s. And so it was a time when there was a ton of money in library marketing, and libraries had money. So we would read all these books that had gotten raves in the Horn book and the Bulletin that were very, some of them were enormously influential. The 70s was the time when YA had just exploded. The Chocolate War came out, and we debated whether a book, for people who don't know, the Chocolate War was really the first young adult or children's novel that didn't have a happy ending. And it was groundbreaking for that. So anyway, I was in this children's book discussion group because I love children's books, and I hadn't stopped that when I started reading books for adults. So when I went to college at the University of Chicago, at that time they had library school. And Zena Sutherland, who was the reviewer for the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books, taught a children's literature class. And I took it, and she would just recount all these anecdotes. And she talked about having lunch with Ursula Nordstrom, the famous Harper publisher, in 1965. And that Ursula Nordstrom told her that she was going to quit her job when Where the Wild Things Are didn't win the Caldecott. Just like, that damned Inch by Inch by Leo Leone is going to win. And I remember like holding on to the side of my chair and thinking, this is where I belong. Like, let this happen to me. I thought until her Zena's class, I thought I'd be a librarian or a teacher because I knew I loved children's books. But when Zena told stories about publishing in New York, I could really sense a fit for me. I knew I kind of liked business. I knew I was very comfortable in New York City. And I loved the idea of being in the action of creating the books. So I graduated from college. I moved to New York and slept on somebody's, like on a twin bed in a living room that was behind a screen, and applied for entry-level jobs. And I started at Viking Children's Books. And I was trained by the great legendary editor, Deborah Brody, and Regina Hayes was the publisher. So from the two of them, I learned so much. And I worked there for 18 years when we published things like The Stinky Cheese Man came out then, and the whole sort of trend to funny books happened. We published Matilda. Excuse me, I forgot to turn my phone off.
The Matilda by Roald Dahl. That's
what?
The Matilda by Roald Dahl. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was so exciting. I never met him. I met several of his daughters. The manuscript was sent to Farrar Straus originally, and there's different stories about why it ended up with us and not there. We had acquired some of his books for paperback in the Puffin line, and after Matilda, we did all his other books, but Matilda was until he died, and a few that he sort of had after that. But Matilda was really the one that kind of rocked the world. You know, became such a classic. We didn't really know at the time that it was going to stand along with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James as one of the greats, but I think it has.
The manuscript didn't emit a magic glow and maybe an ethereal sound to let you know it was the...
It does not. And I know that the true story of the Three Little Pigs had been turned down somewhere else, and Lane Smith came in with his portfolio and said, you know, I have this manuscript that a friend of mine wrote. We thought it was really funny. And Regina Hayes made the decision to print it, and printed what at the time was not a very large quantity. It was 12,500 copies, and we knew we liked it, but we didn't know if anybody else would like it. And you know, it went and went, and then they did Stinky Cheese Man next, and kind of created a genre. So those are a few stories. I'm sorry, I told you I was the queen of anecdote. So.
No, I love anecdotes. Tell us more about finding Matilda and all sorts of wonderful things, because you've done just about everything there is to do in publishing at this point, yeah?
Well, first of all, I didn't find Matilda. I was an assistant when Matilda was sent in.
Being part of a search party? Is that fair, or not even that?
No. I saw it. I probably wrote the catalog copy and flap for it, because I did a lot of that in those days. And I know that Dahl wasn't taking much editorial feedback, if any, at that time. The thing that I do remember really vividly was Stephen King was the #1 author in the country. And Deborah Brody had read one of his novels and thought he really understands families and children. And she wrote to him and said, have you ever thought about writing for kids? And he said, well, you know, my daughter doesn't like horror, and I do have a story that I told her, and that was The Eyes of the Dragon. And he, you know, there was, boy, for children, in those days, children's publishing was not the big business it is now. So Stephen King was really big business. There was a lot of pressure on us. And Deborah wrote him an editorial letter, or she raised a few things, and he kind of would say, you know, wasn't used to the deep dive that children's book editors would give everything. And so she sort of decided she could ask for a few things. And like 3 things. She actually said to me, I think I can ask him to do 3 things, and I'm going to pick those carefully. And if you know The Eyes of the Dragon, it's the story about a good prince and a bad prince who are brothers. And the good prince, somewhere like 100 pages into the novel, his best friend is introduced when he's like age 12. And Deborah said, well, if he's his best friend, how come we haven't seen him previously in the book? And Stephen King gave us a revision with a scene where the two met during a 3-legged race that was so seamless. I'd never seen a revision where you believed that you almost couldn't tell that it was a revision at all. And it was in that moment that I really understood what a great storyteller he was. It was like he had chiseled something out of the book that we didn't know was there. It was amazing. So when he does revise, he's incredible. And
taking divine dictation, you think, or what is his secret?
I know what is his secret, but I'm sure it's craft, because his book on writing is really a great has been a great help to a lot of writers. And I read, gosh, when did I read this? It would have been 2012 maybe, that Eyes of the Dragon was re-optioned and going to come out as a film. So I guess, who knows? That would be fun.
Sooner or later, they're going to make every one of his books into 5 movies. So
I read Gerald's Game. So it was a lot of fun. We sat right next to the adult design department, and we would watch his jackets go through 500 iterations, and we would watch things like, I remember the original cover of It, that the designer typed it onto a piece of paper and then kept blowing it up on the Xerox, and that's how it got that like chewed up image. And in Gerald's Game, spoiler alert, if you haven't read Gerald's Game, I'm about to say something. In Gerald's Game, I was in the office on a Saturday, and the designer needed somebody to sign the letter at the end of the book, but the woman has had to peel her skin off to get out of a handcuff, so her handwriting was supposed to be terrible, and I have really bad handwriting. So if you get the original hardcover, that's my signature in the back book. And I took the book in galleys on a Now march to Washington. It was a pro-choice march, and we all were passing the pages around in the bus, which was so fun. You know, a woman who's like reliving her past with an abusive father, but it definitely kept us entertained while stuck on a long bus ride.
That is probably his. I'm trying to think if there's a more appropriate book that he wrote for that.
Maybe Dolores Claiborne. I'm also thinking that somebody's listening to this podcast and was like, I thought we were going to talk about middle grade fiction. Why?
We'll talk about it all. They can wait for a Stephen King anecdote.
But you'll see my point, which is that I knew I should work in publishing. I knew it was the right field for me. I love working in it. I just think everything that happens in creating a book is interesting. Haven't changed.
And you were, I assume, a big voracious reader as a child on?
Right. And I'm sure everybody listening to this would say this, but you know, my biggest problem is I don't have enough time to read, and I've deliberately made time to read because there were a few years when I was at Simon & Schuster in the beginning when I was at Egmont that I didn't have enough time to read for pleasure, and it seemed like something was really missing. So I figured out how to carve it out. And the reason I didn't have time, because you look curious, is because you're so busy reading manuscripts all the time to acquire. Or when you're the head of an imprint, you need to read the things that your editors are doing as well. And I want to read my adult novels too.
So what is your reading speed? How many books are you turning in a month, a week?
Gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't think it's fast. Unless I get obsessed with something. I don't know what my reading speed is. I don't keep track. Do you know what yours is?
Occasionally. I mean, if it's a John Grisham, I've been known to sit down around 8 o'clock at night, and then 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, oh my God, I've got to get up for work in a few hours, but at least the book's done.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a lot of YAs or middle grades that I can definitely do in a day, but, and I definitely got some skills when I was reading more manuscripts of sort of going through them fast. But when I love a book, I don't want to read it too fast.
That's true. I've shot myself in the foot. I had the proud experience when the last Harry Potter came out. My wife and I, of course, went at midnight and got our copies. And then she proceeded to sit down and she had it finished by the afternoon of the next day. And I still had book left for another 2 days. So I had to avoid her talking about it. Don't spoil. But the adventure continued just a little bit longer for me, and I'd set it down and say, nope, not yet. I want to have some more of that tomorrow.
Yeah, you meted it out.
And I assume you do different types of reading. If you're just reading for pleasure versus you're doing your deep editorial reading, that must impact the amount of the speed with which you read.
Yeah, an editorial read is a different thing. It almost... Every once in a while you get a book. I edited a book a long time ago, well, when I was at Egmont, called The False Princess by Eilish O'Neill. And that book was almost perfect. So I don't remember having to, I know I asked her to do some things, but I remember what an easy read it was when I read it. But usually when you're editing, it's a very slow, careful. I'm thinking like a kid, the kid reader I was when I read, but I'm paying attention to everything. And I'm writing down every question I have that occurs to me and every place I get stuck. And I also notice a big thing I rely on is if I'm suddenly on the next page and I don't know how I got there, it means my attention drifted. And I go back, and if it happens a second time, then I think, oh, something happened in the book and I lost my interest, and then I go back and try to figure out what that was.
That makes sense.
Because it doesn't happen to me when I'm reading a good adult novel. You know, my mind doesn't drift. So when it drifts, that tells me it's something in the book.
I almost get just a little bit annoyed sometimes when I read a book that's really, really well written, just because if I'm pleasure reading, then if I'm reading like a James Patterson, no offense to Mr. Patterson, we all think he's amazing, and even if we don't, let's say we do, but you know, I can flip through his and be done in a night. Whereas if I pick up an Anne Patchett, then I'm going to be sitting there for a while because I'm going to reread those sentences and say, how did she do it?
I don't do a lot of marveling at the beauty of a sentence. I'm just not that kind of reader. But I do a lot of, I love the world and I love the characters and I really care and I'm so worried about somebody and what are, you know, and are they going to be okay? And that kind of way I get deeply, deeply invested.
Okay, so here you are. You're a voracious reader, and I know because I've been reading your online information that you had at one point you've got a deep love of theater and of acting, and I think I read a quote something from you that you said that if you could act or sing and be in a musical, you would give up editing and you'd go do that. Is that right?
Yeah, if I had any talent. Yeah, if I had any talent, that's true. Because I'm hammy. But you know, I have a theory. I read this once in an Andy Warhol book. He had a friend, I think it was Henry Getzhelder, who was at the time, I think he was the head of the Metropolitan. I mean, I was probably in college or early 20s when I read it, and Warhol had this theory that because what Getzhelder loved something even more than art, but Warhol's theory was it's great to not work in the field you love best. And I would say I work in the field I love best, which is books. I mean, I feel I'm really, really lucky and graced that I had this passion and was able to work in it. But what I love about the theater, besides how caught up in it I am when I watch it, is that I don't work in it. So I don't have any jealousies about somebody else getting to work on something I would have liked. I don't experience a failure of something I love as painfully. It's really fun to love something and cheer for it and champion it and be into it, but not be attached like, you know, my career, or I'm, you know, like Ursula Nordstrom saying I'm going to quit my job if Where the Wild Things Are doesn't win the, you know, I'm glad it's bad, you know. So that's one of the things that's so great about theater. And it's the opposite of reading, because reading, even though I change, and I'm sure you've had this experience, but I've reread books that I read when I was in high school and been like, oh my God, I missed I missed the entire thing that the author was trying to say, or something I've been reading when I'm trying to think of something I read in college and then reread and it struck me very differently. Persuasion by Jane Austen is like that. I mean, I thought she was a spinster when I read it, and she's 27. And, you know, now I think she was dutiful and then got another chance and took it. That's how I read it. But my point is, theater is different every night. And you're with the audience, and it's happening in the communication with the stage, and it's live, and it's exciting that way. And it's, whereas the book, every time, you can bring it back to yourself every time. And there's no way, you can capture. In like 1993 or something, I saw a production of A Little Night Music at the National Theater, and it was sold out, and I stood in line at the crack of dawn to get a day seat, so I was in the center seat of the front row. And Judi Dench, who wasn't an icon in America then, but just a good working theater actress, in the opening waltz, came out to the front of the stage and like looked out into the audience, and I just was like, oh my God, I'm so haunted by that look. It contains generations. So I sold a ticket to something else I had and went back to see it. Then I went back to London in January to see it another time. And then I had to talk to my therapist about, it's a stage show. I'm trying to capture something that you can't, I was like obsessed. And thank God they recorded it, so I have the songs, and that's helped me remember it. But books are different. Books are the great old friend that you can bring out every single time, and theater only exists in the moment when you're watching it.
Makes sense. So how obviously pre-quarantine, pre-lockdown, how often did you go to the theater?
I've been asked that a few times. I don't really know. I think about 80 times a year.
Wow.
I don't think that's a lot. That's not even twice a week, right? Maybe.
Well, that was a jealous wow. I should clarify.
I think, and also because I would always get to go to London at least once a year, and I would be able to cram in a lot of shows then. So that brought my average up a bit. And if you live in New York, you can volunteer usher at a few theaters. So there were a few things I could see for free. But yeah, a lot.
And I'm sure if you're in line, have you usually got a book or a manuscript, something that you're reading to pass the time?
I used to. I remember waiting in line for free tickets to Shakespeare in the Park with boxes of manuscripts and reading through a lot of things out there. And Adam Rapp, who's both a playwright and a young adult author, I was editing a manuscript of his, and I left it under my seat at the theater at a play it's by Carol Churchill, and it was about Ceausescu, something forest. That was mortifying. I mean, I went back to the theater and they had it, thank God. But so yeah, there was a lot of reading in the breaks. Also, once I was so bored, my friend was in something, and it was so horrible. I remember getting the manuscript out and tilting it towards the little light on the side of and trying to, read.
Well, if your friend, was blinded by the studio lights and didn't see it, what's the harm?
Exactly.
That's theater lights, studio lights, theater lights. So, just out of curiosity, what would you say, maybe if you had to pick like 3 or 4 of your most favorite moments in a theater, what are things that could never be replicated? Obviously, we've covered Judi Dench's performance.
In a Little Light Music, oh my God. Okay. Wow, what a fun question. I'll try to blow through this because I feel guilty about people who want to hear about really great novels. 3 or 4 things that could never be replicated. Well, when I was, probably in like the first year I worked at Viking or something, I went to see Nicholas Nickleby, which was 8 hours long. And in those days, plays weren't 8 hours long. And I remember getting out of and taking a taxi home, and I got out and I was like, I'm in New York. Like I just forgot. It was like living in Dickensian London, that production. It was extraordinary. And the ending of it is so moving that's an image. At the end of the play, the entire company is standing around singing God Rest You Merry Gentlemen, and Nicholas picks up Smike and carries him to the front of the stage and just stands there with him in his arms. And it's like, yeah, I still haven't gotten over that one. So is that Judi Dench? I think I've seen a lot of productions of Sunday in the Park with George, and I think you can't wreck the end of the first act. And I certainly remember when all the characters who have been in the act sing this beautiful, beautiful song and suddenly form the painting Afternoon on the Island of the Grand Jatte, the great painting by Seurat that's in the Art Institute. And they freeze into place, and you see the painting, and the lights go out, and, that's pretty amazing. Okay, that's 3.
That's 3. That's pretty good. A life well lived, I would say that.
Also, if Leslie Odom Jr. is watching this, he went right. His voice went right through me in Hamilton. So I believe that we're destined. Although he's happily married with a child, I think I'm his true love, and he just doesn't know that yet.
Well, he does now. We
Yeah.
just told
I'm
him.
sure he's a big listener to Middle Grade Ninja.
Absolutely. I'm sure you can expect a phone call or an email directly. I saw that you'd seen Hamilton 5 times. Is that right?
4 times on Broadway, once in Chicago and once in London, so 6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I had a ticket to see it at the Public, but I had a chance to travel that I took instead. That would have been 7. And I once kissed Jonathan Groff. That's my claim to fame. I'm putting it on my business card.
Really? What were the circumstances for which that happened?
He stopped me on the street and said, I don't know who you are. No, I was at Broadway Con, which is a great, if you love Broadway, it's this wonderful convention. It's the Broadway Con it's like Comic-Con for Broadway fans. And there was a family feud with 2 teams, and I switched seats, and my team, as we walked out, I thought, ooh, if Leslie Margarita, who's a Broadway star, will change seats with me, I'll get to face off opposite Jonathan Groff. So there we were, about to hit the buzzer, like, how you face off on Family Feud, one team and the other. And I just thought I could give him a big old smooch. So I did.
I assume it was well received. You went.
It certainly was. Oh my God, it certainly was. And he looked at me and he said, "You're a good kisser, Elizabeth." It was amazing.
Fantastic. That's wow.
I know. It was really, what can I say? I saw my chance and I went for it.
Of things that you might regret it someday, that won't be one of them. You nailed it.
That's right.
So okay, so and I like to think esteemed audience is fascinated by the journey to becoming an editor, and then we're gonna pick your brain because I know you have more expertise than I will ever be able to tease out. But by God, we will talk about editing and all kinds of hardcore stuff. But let's talk a little bit about that process of being trained by it's Deborah Brody.
Yes, she's passed away, but she was at Viking for 22 years, and then she went to Roaring Brook. But she was a real editor's editor, and she was a very good teacher. And she, took the time with me as her assistant to really teach me everything she was doing. I also wrote long editorial. I had to write an editorial report when I applied for the job on a manuscript in progress. It was Zibby O'Neill's In Summer Light. And I would write letters. I would write editorial reports on manuscripts she was editing, and she would pull sentences out of my reports and put them in the letters to the writers. She would use my feedback when she liked it. She never gave me credit for any of it, but that was okay. I understood that was part of the process. And, she really took the time to explain it to me. And I would say that, where I instinctually fit best was middle grade and young adult fiction, more than picture books, more than nonfiction. That was my real sweet spot. And it was probably, middle grade fiction was probably Deborah's sweet spot also, because she edited a lot of books that were very big in those days. There was a book called Nothing's Fair in 5th grade that, sold 500,000 copies for Scholastic Book Club. And what Deborah taught me was, you can raise anything you want in a letter, as long as you're respectful, professional to professional. You can ask any question. You always point out things that are good about the book first, before you start talking about things that you want the author to think about. And within the manuscript, make sure you say positive things as well. And Deborah used to call that yummying up. But I think it's important that people feel acknowledged for all the stuff that's working in their book, especially since I'm going to say, I'm confused here, and this character contradicts what you just said, and I don't buy this guy, and what about, I would think it would be sort of hurtful. So you ought to at least get the applause for the good stuff. So I definitely learned that from Deborah.
And so you're working under her, with her. and you're providing feedback. She's adding some yummy to it, taking credit for your insights along the way.
She knew what she was doing. I was a complete administrative assistant. I did she didn't type. This was before we had a computer, believe it or not. I did all the typing, all the filing, all the mailing. I met the Hampton Jitney to pick up the artwork for Eyes of the Dragon that came in 3 pieces at a time. If she needed something, I did it. That's the deal that entry level is. I did a lot of Xeroxing of things with, in those days, she would literally attach paper flags to a manuscript. She would write on it in pencil and stick a flag with there was a thing that you could stick on with like stick it onto the manuscript, fold it over, it was a flag, and she could write comments on that. And I would have to Xerox each page and the flags, and the next page and the flags. It's very boring. But, in seeing all that, you really understand how a book gets published. And I saw Deborah go back and back until she was completely satisfied with something. She wouldn't let a book go until she had worked on every detail as much as she could. And in the end, the decision is always the author's, what they want to keep. It's their name on the book. Our job is to be subjective and try to help the author's voice become as clear as it can be. I also think, I wonder if every editor thinks this. I think I'm more, our job is to be objective. I think I'm more objective than Deborah was. She had a bit of an agenda of certain things she wanted to see more of in books. She wanted, this would be an example. She had an issue that her husband's career, in her family, her husband's career was taken more seriously than hers. So every time this was mentioned in a book or something about like mom's job, she would be like, make that job, make the mother's job more important. That's called pushing your own agenda onto a manuscript, right? But I think everybody does that unconsciously, whether they realize it or not, probably. We have things that we're uncomfortable with, that we don't like, so we ask the writer to change it. But mostly, I think my job is helping a writer express what they're trying to express as best they can. And, please a middle grade reader.
So does it come up that there's something in a book that you don't agree with, that you maybe even wish the author wouldn't say, but it's what the author wants to say and what the reader would want?
Yes, it happens all the time. I remember there was a book I did called Shakespeare and Macbeth by Stuart Ross, and he's a wonderful writer. He's British, and the book was about Shakespeare at the time he was writing Macbeth, and the idea was to help kids who were studying Macbeth in school understand it better. And since Stuart was British, there were things that the American audience needed, and he was very good about putting them in, except for one thing. And of course, that one thing was what the Times critic picked up on. And I remember the copy editor had seen it, said, "We told him," So yeah, sure, it happens all the time. And sometimes I'm not sure what I think, and I ask my colleagues. I'll bring things to an editorial meeting, or when Holiday House was still in person, and I could still do this on a Zoom call easily, but I would stick my head over where the assistants are, where there are 4 assistants who work there, or actually there's an associate editor and 3 assistants, and I'd say, "You guys, how does this sound to your ear?" And I'll read a sentence, or "What do you think of this word?" Because sometimes you need some perspective. So.
Gotcha. So you get a little bit of almost a hive mind going. I'm assuming you're doing the same for them.
Sure. And, let's not forget, editing and writing are art forms. It's not a science where there's only one right answer.
Does that ever frustrate you? Frustrates me.
It doesn't frustrate me, but I had an experience with a book that I did not edit, where I really had a realization about this. There's a book I love called Silent to the Bone by E.L. Konigsberg. And of course, she's most famous from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley, Frank Weller, and A View from Saturday. So she's won the Newbery twice. A View from Saturday kind of gets on my nerves. Personally, I find it a little coy, the tone is a little knowing, a little like that they're all better than we know. I don't know, a little bit like she's winking at. There's something that gets on my nerves about that book. But Silent to the Bone, which didn't win anything, I think is incredible. I love that book. And I mentioned it to Wendy Lamb, who's an editor who I have so much respect for, and she's one of the greatest editors that, in my professional lifespan. And Wendy was like, oh, I would have asked her to do some different things with that book. I had a problem with the brother, and why didn't you bring it? And I was like, wow, editing is really subjective, because I think the book's a masterpiece. You know what I mean? Like, it really is just one person's opinion. So, there you go.
For good and for ill, yes.
That's right.
There's a quote from you. It's a little bit facetious, this question, but I wanted to get your perspective on it while I'm chatting with you. You have said that some things in the industry of publishing are constant and will never change. The demand for the very best writing and artwork that shows something personal from a child's world. Trends or no trends, this is in fact what every publisher is looking for. So why is it important that the best writing and artwork shows something personal from a child's world? I mean, wouldn't just the best writing and artwork already be enough?
Well, that is an interesting question. I came up with that quote because I needed to put something on my website. And I think I wanted to say from a child's point of view, because sometimes when people are starting out and looking for, they have an idea that they want to share with a kid, they have forgotten to really tap their, I hate to use this phrase, but they've forgotten to think like a kid, and they're writing like an adult who's condescending or sharing to children. So I think when I said that thing about from a child's point of view, I was trying to speak to what I suspected would be some of the people who were reading my website and wondering whether they should work with me. I'm sure we could think of great books that aren't from a, really from a kid's point of view at all, that are for kids. But when I think of the ones that I read over and over, it was always because there was a kid I related to in some way and I liked. And whether I realized it or not, I was projecting myself into them. And I understood how they felt. And I wanted to, hear how it came out. I'm not even sure Dr. Seuss, there's an illustration, like One Fish, Two Fish. That was one of my favorite books as a kid. Is that really, does it have a kid and a kid's point of view in it? Not really. But it certainly knows what kids think is funny or interesting. There's a picture of sheep walking across a landscape at night that I would suspect I must have spent, 50 hours staring at when I was like 2 and 3 years old. I was really haunted by it. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I think that it does. How do you maintain a child's perspective when you're editing middle grade fiction and make sure that you're staying within the realm of what would be ideal for kids?
Well, I know Ursula Nordstrom, the legendary editor at Harper, who not only discovered Maurice Sendak, but she worked with Laura Ingalls Wilder and all the greats sort of the Nutshell Library. I've never worked at Harper, so I can't spew off Ursula's many great credentials, but she was probably the most famous children's book editor in history. And a book of her letters is collected and called Dear Genius. But anyway, Ursula said, I was a child and I remember every single moment. And that's kind of how I feel. I just remember what I thought when I was reading. And that's what I apply. And it's interesting because I think books have changed some, but that really has not changed. Kids sort of feel the same inside. They still want to see themselves. They still want a story that they care about and that's interesting to them. They don't like, the thing that never works is that thing that somebody thinks is going to touch all the hot points and they shove it into a formula and put it out there, and kids just roll their eyes at that. They know that somebody's trying to reach them. And we turn things down that have, where you can just see that somebody had this hey, Riverdale is hot, so what if we took Riverdale and Never Have I Ever and made it all Black characters for Black Lives Matter and stuck in, what else is trendy right now? What did they call it? it's emotional learning or something, and put in like EQ, and they'll all be wearing masks, and you get that, and you're like, a kid would look at, give me a break. We get submissions like that all the time. You know, the formulaic, this will appeal to a child, never works.
So I at this point, I know that you're with Holiday House at this point. You're doing a lot of their back catalog stuff. Are you still reviewing submissions?
I am still reviewing submissions. I have a new book from Dan Gutman called Houdini and Me, about a kid who lives in Houdini's house in New York, and Houdini contacts him and wants to switch bodies with him, and suddenly this poor kid finds himself being lifted upside down in a straitjacket in 1921. So that's a book I'm editing. I edited a book called The Itch by Polly Farquhar that just came out and got 2-star reviews about it. It's for middle graders, and it's set in Ohio with a kid who has idiopathic angioedema, which is his skin starts itching when he doesn't know why. And it's really not about that. It's about kids, you know, a new kid in school and everybody trying to get along, and the kind of things that you really think about a lot when you're in 6th grade. But one of the things I like about it, one, it's set in the Ohio heartland and not on one of the coasts, you know, set in farm country where everybody watches the Ohio State football games. And 2, 3 of the kids in the book have very serious health conditions, and it's all treated as incidental. It's not, you know, like kids we know in real life who have food allergies or, you know, carry an EpiPen and have it interact with this, but it doesn't define who they are. So that's, anyway, so yeah, I'm acquiring, I try to do 1 or 2 original books every season. Plus I do work on the backlist, that's right.
I lost my question. Oh, I wanted to make sure I reminded esteemed audience that episode 38, you can listen to Dan Gutman telling us about the very Houdini book that is now being edited. We had a robust discussion about that, and of course, My Weird School and all the other wonderful things Dan Gutman does. And
the book, Dan. It'll be out in March 2021.
March 2021. Dan Gutman is just called Houdini and I.
Houdini and Me.
Houdini and Me. And he gave, I'm not going to give it away, but he gave one of the best tips for school visits I've ever heard in my life. And as soon as we're all back and in person, I will be continuing to implement it because it's great. So seek that out, esteemed audience.
I believe it. Dan, hey, I did acquire and edit Dan's very first children's book.
Really?
So, yes. And it's still in print. It's called Baseball's Biggest Bloopers. Dan was an adult sports writer, and he had a book coming out at Viking Adult, and he asked his editor if he knew anybody in children's, and the editor knew me, and the manuscript came in, and we actually did a 2-book contract. The other was for the 10 greatest games of baseball ever played, and thus was a middle grade rock star born.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever had the experience ever where a book came in and it was just perfect? No need to edit anything here. Let's fire up the presses.
No. I've always had something to say.
So let's talk a little bit about submissions. So a book comes in. Do you bother with queries at this point from either, are you reading direct from authors, or are these all agented submissions?
We read, Holiday House accepts manuscripts to submissions@holidayhouse.com. So we do read everything that comes into that address. We can't get back to everybody because we don't have the bandwidth to reply to everybody, but we read everything. Agents do almost always these days query you to see if you're interested in something before they send it out. And it's rare, it's not unusual for me to say, when somebody queries me, for me to ask the other editors, is this something that interests you, because I know it's not right for me. It's rare for me to just say, no, I'm not interested, without at least trying other people first. But there are things I know I'm not good at. I'm not good at cookbook. I'm not, let's see, what do I know I don't like? Science books, because we have a couple of people who are great at them. I think some really cutting edge, heavy YA complex fantasy that we have a young editor named Maura Couch who's excellent and really an expert in that field, so I passed that on to her. You know, I have a sense of what people are great at. So sometimes if something isn't right for me, I'll show it to somebody. I'll ask if somebody else wants to look at it. And sometimes I've looked at something because an editor's passed it on to me.
So when you're looking at a submission, obviously if it's from an agent, if you just got the query, then you're just thinking about the overall concept. But if you have both a query and either a sample or a full manuscript, do you bother with the query, or you just dig in to see what the writing's like?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you for asking that question. In the old days, when manuscripts came in the mail to us, I never read the query. I always started reading the manuscript first. I just would turn the page because I was so curious to get to the writing. So I think that answers your question, right? Yeah,
right
really
there.
But I think a lot of agents stick a little sample from the book in their query letters sometimes. You know, like a few lines or something, enough to at least try to catch your opinion.
And surely the agents who are listing will be doing that when they query you from now on.
You know, it's not hard to say yes and start reading something and no. You know, sometimes you just know right away you don't like something. I try to give something a bit of a chance because I think there are times from the first few pages that I'm not going to know how much I like something. You know, the first time I read Harry Potter, I remember loving like that somebody was watching on Privet Drive and something was going on. But then I got to the Dursleys, who are very caricatured. They're kind of Dahl-like, you know, Roald Dahl-like. And I had no idea what was going to come up. And then I loved, like, the Dursleys is like my least favorite part of the Harry Potter books. It's a kind of exaggerated character that isn't my thing. So what if I just stopped reading there, you know, as an example? So I always want to make sure I give something a chunk. But sometimes you just know it's just not for you.
So what's a fair chunk then? Do you have like a page count, word count?
Well, if I read 20 to 25 pages and I don't like the voice or the character, it's just not speaking to me, then I know. But I would say 40 more often. Or the other clue is, again, if I just can't keep my interest. If I find I have to go back and restart it more than, you know, a couple of times, it's not for me. Here's a question you're not asking, but that I think is good.
Excellent.
I think most editors have turned down things that became big hits for other people. And I was going to write a blog entry on mistakes I had made in my job, things I had passed on, things I regret. And I thought, well, somebody's going to read this and really think that I suck and no one will hire me. So let me get some of my friends to share stories about things that they, you know, times they turned down something. So I put out a call, and all anybody would cop to were the times their bosses wouldn't let them acquire something that they thought was good. But I was looking for the times we passed on something. And the only editor who shared an anecdote about passing on something was Jill Davis of Harper. But I remembered other stories, but I didn't want to use anybody's stories without permission. So, for instance, Honus and Me by Dan Gutman was sent to me, and I said, this reads like an original paperback. In those days, it read like an original paperback. It didn't read like a book that I thought, wrongly, lots of libraries and schools would buy. And I said you'd be better off with like a house like Scholastic that has an original paperback line. I was so wrong. You know, I cost Viking children's books tons of money, and all that whole Babe and Me, that whole great series, it was a disaster. So I think most editors have stories like that. I know I've worked with people who passed on things that got a Newbery Honor or stuff like that. How do you know?
Well, in a situation like that, do you take sort of a Zen-like approach and say, well, if I had it, I wouldn't have had the enthusiasm it needed to go on to be great? Or is it just, nope, I'm guilty. I have
the most famous example in that I don't know if this is the most famous example, but I remember it vividly. Jane Yolen submitted the manuscript of Owl Moon to Deborah. Deborah asked me for a reader's report. I didn't like it. I told Deborah why I didn't like it. Deborah turned it down. Jane Yolen will tell you a lot of other people turned it down. And Patty Gouch knew John Schoenherr, and now I don't remember why she knew him. But she was the only editor who would have matched up John Schoenherr with that manuscript, and then it went on to win the Caldecott, and it was a huge book in Jane's career. So that was definitely a book that got to the right person at the right time. But, there I was, a snotty little assistant saying, no, I don't like it,
What did you find that there were phases? I'm just curious, did you have to go through, not maybe have to, but did you go through some phases where you got a little bit puffed up, a little, hey, look at me, I'm big time here, I'm Viking, 18 years with Viking, I'm head of Egmont, I'm throughout your career, have you had moments where maybe your ego got just a little bit too big and had to come back, or?
Oh God, yes. Yes, in my world, I'm a Leo. I think that, I'm not really convinced that the world isn't secretly revolving around me. So I'm always getting kicked in the ass with what's the truth of life. But yes, I would say yes. I got fired at Simon & Schuster, which isn't unusual. A lot of people get fired at Simon & Schuster. And, but it was still hard to go through. And then I got laid off at Egmont, although Egmont, didn't work. So those things are both, really hard to go through, really hard. But the only part that it didn't really change how much I loved the books or anything like that. It's sort of, I would say at Simon & Schuster, I wasn't, I was hired by someone to do a certain kind of job, and when she left, I was no longer really a fit for what they needed. And I have some regrets that we didn't make Egmont into a big major publishing player, and it didn't stick around. It was a great company to work for.
Well, have you noticed with either yourself or with all the editors you've known, are there phases in an editorial career where you can maybe, I know anecdotally in finance business, we could spot somebody who's in their second, third year. Oh, look at this person. They think they've got the market figured out. They're feeling good. They've just had a great trading day. That's somebody that's going to crash. Have you found that there are phases where somebody would get too egotistical, or conversely get to a point where they say, well, I'm terrible. This book I knew would do well, didn't do well, and so I must question all of my judgment, and I'm just awful for now?
God, what an interesting question. I would say there have been a few people who were so talented early on that you could tell that they were going to go far, that they were going to be great. And they were always people who put a lot of work in as well. Karen Lotz, who's the publisher of Candlewick and Walker Worldwide, I worked in the same building in her. I worked for Viking and she worked for Dutton, but I remember that she worked till like 3 a.m. and she was so smart and she did all this stuff. And I thought, well, she could run this company. And, she did end up running a company. But if your question is, in finance, we know people are going to get bit in the ass. I think something happens where people do get hot hands, and suddenly you have a couple of big books, and everybody wants to send manuscripts to you because they think you have great taste, and also the company's behind you and they're backing your book, so they're gonna, and that can be hard to impact. It can be hard sometimes to get on the first round of really hot submissions lists, but I think there's, as I've mentioned, these younger editors at Holiday House, there's Sally Moorbridge and Maura Couch, who are doing these amazing books. Maura is an associate editor, and she did a book called Brother's Keeper this year that's gotten 4-star reviews, and it's an extraordinary story of a brother and sister escaping North Korea. And I think that now that Maura's had this really high-profile book, she's finding herself getting a lot more manuscripts. So that's what you see. You see someone get a hit, and then people submit to that person, and it's kind of nice to watch it, actually.
let's talk a little bit about submission. So a submission comes in. You were reading about 40 pages most of the time. I assume if you've got one that's just dreadful for 5 pages, then maybe you're busy.
Yes, I just want to say that agents screen. Agents screen for you. Usually, if you get something from an agent, it's because they believe they can sell it, and they know. So it's not like when I was an assistant in the late 80s and we were reading the slush pile, and stuff then was really bad. The SCBWI wasn't a big organization then, and there wasn't the internet, so people couldn't do the research, and you just got horrible crap all the time. So
fair enough. So that has abated a little bit with the internet.
I think so. There's certainly a lot more available for people who are willing to learn. There's a lot of great stuff. The SCBWI, I believe, has done this huge service by really offering a place where the SCBWI serves a lot of writers and illustrators, but it's also a great place to go if you're a beginner. You can attend one conference and learn so much about what you need to do to submit and all that stuff. And I think that's great.
So what are some of the most common reasons for why you would say no, even though an agent's gone through and screened it ahead of time?
Well, lack of interest.
Fair enough.
It's a ton of work to put out a book. You really have to like it. I have to imagine that, I have to be kind of bouncy in my seat. That's a good sign. I love the characters. If it's a picture book, I can imagine reading it out loud with the kid and how much fun it would be to read aloud with or I imagine myself as a kid reading it and how much I would like it. There's a line in the musical company. There's a line that somebody sings when somebody's about to get married. The heart sinks down and feels dead. And, if I'm noticing this, like, I really don't want to, that is such a sign that I need to reject it. Because sometimes you think, this book is a good idea, and I could work and make this book good. But I have a feeling in my bones like, that's when you should pass.
Well, what if you get a manuscript and you like the manuscript, but the author says something that says, no, I like the book, but I don't want to work with that author? Or is that a problem for you?
Oh, what a juicy question that is. How am I going to answer that one? I will say there's an author who I remember is considered, well, let's see, how can I say this? If a writer or an agent, because sometimes there's a writer who you love, but their agent is a lot of work, makes a lot of changes to the contract, never happy about whatever you're doing for marketing. I don't really have any relationships with agents like that, but it could happen. But the person is great and they're a great writer, you'll do it because it's worth it. I knew an agent who I don't believe is in the business anymore, but she was really disorganized, and it was I had an idea for a book and I knew somebody who could write it, but his agent was she was just, I didn't want to have to do all the work of organizing her and following up with her and having her ask questions that weren't relevant to the book. So I sent it to somebody else. So that's bad. Doesn't happen very often. But there was a writer on the Simon & Schuster list who somebody edited. She had left another house because the house didn't want to work with her anymore, but we had an editor who thought she was worth it. So that could happen. I guess that answers your question.
I think so.
Yeah. I'd rather work with somebody who was a good writer. Who was a really good writer and really difficult than the saddest thing, which is when you love someone but you can't publish their next book because their sales track isn't good enough, or maybe they just aren't breaking through, they're not making money for you. That's much harder. And that's actually a tip I have for writers. I've been in a situation a few times where somebody really, really yelled at me. One time it was because I was a young, immature editor and I didn't know how to say no to her book, and I didn't know what I was doing really. And I kept it hanging around. And so she reamed me out. But other times I've been reamed out because my boss didn't answer something and I couldn't get an answer out of her, and the writer was so frustrated that, I've been yelled at. And I think it's always better, if you're a writer or an artist who's trying to get attention from an editor, to be really nice and make the editor feel incredibly guilty and bad about not getting back to you, than to yell at them when then I think you should be nice to the editor, and you should go out with your friends and have drinks and complain about the editor behind their backs. But yelling at an editor, then they're just even more afraid of then they're even more afraid of dealing with you. Whereas if you're really nice, then we feel more and more guilty. When I get somebody tries to follow up with me because I haven't gotten back to them on a manuscript, and they say, I know you're so busy. And I think, I am sitting at home watching 3 episodes of Ozark. I feel, I have time to get back to this person. Then I always feel really guilty. It's much better than yelling at someone.
That's a little bit essential, right? To protect your time to watch our Ozark.
No, absolutely.
Season 1 and 2, I don't know about 3.
My point is, niceness makes the editor feel much worse than trying to scream at them. That's all I think.
And I would never yell at an editor, but even if I yelled at you and I convinced you through my yelling that I am right, we still have to work together the next day. Yeah, exactly. I don't understand the strategy.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many things about human behavior I don't understand, so we'll just leave it there.
Something that's good about me, I can work with anybody. I've actually, I'm old enough now that I realize this. I've been thrown into situations with problematic people again and again. I can work it out with difficult personalities. So
I'm sure that's a useful skill that's come in handy.
It is useful, yeah.
Just a little bit about literary agents. I'm always curious because I know obviously literary agents back pre-quarantine want to take you to lunch, find out what you're interested in, make sure that they're making a nice impression. What are some things that literary agents do that work, and what have been some things that have just been terrible ideas?
I'm going to tell you that I don't think I've worked with any bad literary agents, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to butter somebody up I'm always talking to writers who are afraid they're going to land with some dud agent who editors all hate or something.
Well, yeah, I'm terrified. You told that story about how that beautiful manuscript, but you didn't want to work with the agent. Like, oh my God, could that be?
Yes, I don't think she's in the business anymore. I will tell you, I'm just going to tell you how bad she was. I was 28 years old, and I was on a panel in the Pacific Northwest. And she said, my client is Eric Kimmel, and he won the Caldecott Medal. And I said, no, he didn't. Of course, to train. And she goes, yes, he did. He won the Caldecott. And I said, well, the Caldecott goes for illustration, and he's a writer. And I know you're talking about Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins, which is the Caldecott Honor book. And, of course, everybody's sitting there like, oh, my God, there's a fight on the panel. What's going on? Everybody in Washington was nice. I was like, if you're an agent and you don't even know that Caldecott goes for illustration and the book didn't win the award, like, what the hell? And then, of course, I had to take the car with her to the airport. So, as I was saying about, like, never fight with somebody because then you're going to be in that. So, so that was that story. But I've forgotten your question. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to know what literary agents do to get your interest that works, and what they do that maybe repulses you a little bit.
It's all about the book. I don't think you're going to believe me. It's so all about the book. I mean, what do they do that repulses us? They ask for a lot more money, and we wish we could buy the book for a lower rate. The one thing that really stunned me once was an agent I know very well, who I've done a lot of books with, said to me, well, it's not your money, so it's not your money. And maybe not, but I'm responsible for how well my book does. And if my book has what's called a write-off, because we've written off lots of the advance doesn't earn out and the company takes the loss and things. I didn't write the check out of my own personal bank account, but it's part of my success or failure as an editor. So, I would like for writers to get a lot of money for what they do. And I would like to also make money for my company, because that's what my company is paying me for. They're paying me to do books that make money for them. They're not paying me to teach a writer how to write. That's why I can't spend more time on. It's one of the things I like about my side hustle of being a freelance editor on weekends and on some evenings, is that then I can work with writers to develop them. But I don't have a lot of time to do that, except unless I've acquired a book during my day job. I'm sort of skipping subjects here. I hope that's making sense. But what I'm saying is my company pays me to produce books that make money, right? That's really their goal. So I see manuscripts where I'd like to do more work on them, but I don't, because I'm not going to acquire them for publication. So I always try to send a rejection letter where I say something helpful, but I can't spend all the time working on a book if I'm not going to take it on.
Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about the side hustle, because esteemed audience can reach out to you and maybe, hopefully, acquire your services directly without any go-between. What's the website where they should go to do that?
It's Elaw Reads, E-L-A-W, that's my nickname, Elaw, elawreads.com, and that should be everything. I work with I've worked with, everything. I mostly work on picture books, middle grade, and young adult fiction. Agents have hired me when they don't have time to get a manuscript in shape, but I've stopped working with agents as part of my side hustle at Holiday House, because I think that would be a conflict of interest to help develop a manuscript that an agent might sell to somebody else. I don't think that seems correct. But agents have hired me. Again, before I was working at Holiday House, a couple of publishers hired me to work with authors on books they had under contract where they didn't have the editorial staff. But most people who hire me are writers who need to get their book in better shape, either to find an agent or find a publisher, or agents like Rick Richter or Sarah Davis say, this is a great concept, but you need to work on the book. You might want to try Elizabeth Law to work on it with you. So that's sort of my side hustle.
So you've got, I was looking through some of the things, you've got a picture book special going right now for the summer.
Oh my God, I have to raise my rate on that. Well, what happened, the whole point with my picture book special was, I realized in May or June, I guess in June, I realized that because I'm not commuting to work, I have about an extra hour, I have more than an extra hour every day. And I realized that people are acquiring a lot of books right now. I understand that this is going to air in, I guess, in October. Is that right, Robert?
Late September, early October.
Early October, but, I had more time to work, and it was very clear to me that publishers were not slowing down in acquiring. And people started contacting me about picture books, and I thought, yeah, I could take some more on. So I knocked my price down to see, I do a 2-round. Working with people for 1 round on a picture book often doesn't work, because they want to revise it and see if they're on the right track. So my picture book special is 2 rounds of revision. It's like, and we talk in the middle. I have a good success rate, actually, if I may slightly boast.
Boast away.
Several people that I've worked with on picture books have gone on to sell their books after we worked together, so that makes me feel good. And a few others have agents. A handful of my novels have sold, and my novels, that's a horrible thing to say. An editor would never call it their book. A few novels I've worked on have gotten contracts after I've worked with the author on them, and I'm glad about that. And a lot of people get representation after working with me. And one of the things I really like about being my side hustle is that I can really talk about the business candidly with people, and I can tell them which agents are looking for stuff, and I can read something and say, we actually get a lot of manuscripts on this topic, but this thing that you're doing is different and pretty original, and that's the one I would push. I like getting to do that.
So what I just heard is anybody writing a picture book who reaches out to you can pretty much be guaranteed publication.
That's what I said. I'll give you your money back. No! I just wrote to somebody wants me to help him with his adult novel, and he said, just candidly, what are my odds of getting a publisher after I work with you on this? And I said, 0. I said 0. You would work with me because you wanted to get it in shape and self-publish it and give it to your friends. This is not a book that's going to be published. So.
Wow, very direct.
That was direct. I thought he should know. You know, if you're like a 60-year-old guy and you had a story you always wanted to tell and you were never a writer at all, you were in totally a different field, and you spewed something out, that is not a book that's going to get published.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Although you keep going, 5 years later.
I did say that to him. I said, I think from where he's starting, it might take 10 years. Robert McKee said he thinks it takes 10 years to make a writer. I'm not sure. But yeah, if he really wanted to keep going, but I don't think I don't know. You didn't read this thing. It was bad. Well, I respect him a lot. He had something he wanted to share. He had a story to tell. And he thought maybe I could hire somebody to help me get it in shape and see if I could get it published. And I just thought it was my job to say, I don't think so. I think I said I would take years of work.
Well, that hopefully saved him time and inspired him to do that work or to walk away before he's invested too much more time and find something else that's really going to make him happy.
That's right. I just did 20 critiques for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators National Conference. And one person asked me, she said, tell me the truth, not what you think I want to hear. Do you think I have something and I should pursue it? And she was a mom who had never written a picture book before, the conference had been her first exposure. And I said to her, what you don't yet know is how many years of work it's going to take for you to get this picture book out. It's going to take years. It's not a question of 3 to 5 rounds of revision. And she said, you're right, I did not know that. And that's what I was trying to say to the guy who approached me about his novel.
You said the magic word. Robert McKee is my and many other people's personal storytelling god. So you're a big McKee believer.
I took a 4-day course with him, and first of all, it was a joy to watch him because he's a born teacher, and I loved watching him do his thing. What I got from McKee was more permission to do what I do. That a story needs plot, but you have to. It has to have the heart. You have to identify with that person and care about what their problem is, and then take them on a journey. I remember that I finished his course on a Sunday and I wrote an editorial letter on Monday, and a letter has never come so fast to me. I was so inspired just to speak my truth. He's a great teacher. Actually, if you look at elawreads.com/blog, one of my entries is like 6 things I learned from his workshop, because I just thought I would pass on some of his tips.
I will seek that out.
Do you remember his tip about own your plot holes? I thought this was the greatest thing. Like, he gives the example, well, there's a couple of examples, and the one I share in the blog is the one from Casablanca. The guy who runs the Blue Parrot, Sidney Greenstreet, who only acts in his own interest the whole movie, somebody has to give the young couple the passes to get out of Casablanca. So Sidney Greenstreet says, I don't know why I'm doing this, but here you go, because it's totally against character that he would do it. So they had to own it. And at the end of, I guess which Terminator movie is it where they go back in time, or they go into the future, and it's Ed Norton as a kid and Linda Hamilton, or it's a movie I never saw, but there's something where somebody says at the end of it, it's possible. The way McKee tells it is, people are going to love the movie and then they're going to go home the next day and pick it apart because they're going to be like, well, wouldn't that situation just recur? So they beat it they beat that happening by having one of the characters say, you know, you could just go back in time and have this whole thing start over again. And the other character says, yeah, we could drive ourselves crazy if we were going to think about that. And so that just like, and I thought that was great advice. Own your plot holes. Call them out.
Makes 100% sense to me.
Yeah, he's a genius, that guy.
Yeah, it's well, we could go on about Robert McKee all day.
Well, the other
Mr.
thing is,
McKee, if you're listening, please come on the show.
If you ever get a chance to watch Robert McKee, I think you can order this online. He has a DVD of a British television show he did where he eviscerates Citizen Kane, and it's really hilarious.
He has liked, I think, about 3 of my tweets, and it's one of the few things that keeps me on Twitter as barely as I'm on there.
Oh, speaking of Twitter, I'm like 20 followers shy of 13,000. So if anybody is listening to this, please follow me at Elot Reads. I tweet a lot of tips about children writing for kids.
Yes, it's a never-ending fountain of information. So folks would be well served to sign up and follow you there.
Thank you.
Because I think I've followed you on Twitter as long as I've been on Twitter. I've been following you and reading the advice that you have. I wanted to ask about an unstuck conversation because I saw that on your site and I wondered, what is that?
Martha Brockenborough, the great writer, suggested that I talk about that because she got stuck and called me once and said, you know, this is a really good service. This is for the writer who's stuck with a plot problem, stuck with a, doesn't know which manuscript to work on next. It's almost something that I hope people who are listening think, yeah, I got stuck on blank or I'm stuck with X. And sometimes I can really coach people through it. So I have a little bit of a getting unstuck thing. I'll talk to you for half an hour and see if I can get you out of it. It's worked a few times.
Sounds worth its weight in gold.
The other specialty I have that I, for some reason, haven't listed is should I break up with my agent? This seems to be my, I didn't know so many people had questions about that, but one person said to me, you know, she goes, Elizabeth, I'll pay you if you'll write the breakup email. And I'm like, okay, easy.
What your agent welcome to dump down population you?
An agent is like a therapist. If you don't have one that you feel confident that you can bring your questions to and you can talk to, then you have the wrong one and you need to move.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I've got. I'm looking at our time, and it's just rushing by. I could. We're not going to scratch the surface of all.
I told you, Robert, I was a fountain of anecdote. What about? Do you have any questions about craft or?
I do, and I want to do kind of a quick craft crash course with you, if we can. So let's start with an opening. What makes a great opening? What are you looking for on page 1?
Oh my God. I'm not sure I'm going to give you an answer you like. And I'm going to talk about the SCBWI again. And I assume every writer knows what I mean, but it's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.org. Great organization. And if you go to one of their conferences, including virtually, you can often sign up for a critique with an editor or writer or agent. And there's something called a gold form that the editor or writer or agent can fill out that has different categories about a book. You know, what's the opening like? Are the characters good? All these different things. And I won't ever use that form because I don't think you apply the same questions to every book. I think you read a book and see how it hits you, and that's how you respond. So one thing I worry about is that writers have tried too hard to cram too much into an opening page, either because we do these wonderful read and responds where we, in front of a group of people, maybe another editor and I at a conference will read first pages and talk about what we're hearing. And I worry that then people think they have to be too loud or make too much of an impression. All I want from a first page is to want to keep reading. And I think I want to keep reading because something has appealed to me or a character situation has spoken to me in some way, so I'm concerned. That works really well. If it's a picture book, maybe the writing is very, I can hear it being read out loud, and I think that's beautiful, or I understand the emotion behind what's happening. Or in a picture book, you usually know what the problem is on the first. By the time you're through one page of text, you definitely know what the problem in the book is going to be, right? So I guess those are all things. I hope that sort of answers your question. Also, I think people should calm down and not worry so much about their first pages. Along with word count, these are the two things I wish people would chill out about.
Really?
Listeners at home, he's raising his eyes. Everybody's going to read more than one page. You don't have to. I understand that, of course, you want the opening of the book to be great, but the book's still not going to work if only the opening is good. And I think people are so concerned about it. I talked to a writer about it last week that she couldn't figure out. She had a lot of characters to introduce. She couldn't figure out how to get them in quickly. And I'm like, I don't think they have to come in quickly. I think only one situation is enough. We'll be interested. One scene is interesting. I don't need to know all these other people in the first 10 pages. That's what I think.
Chill out about word count. I mean, surely if I've got a 200,000 middle grade, 200,000 word middle grade book, we should be paring that down, yeah?
I'm reading a 1,500 page novel right now. It's called A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It's very good. So it's really good. So I especially think it's okay. I just don't think it's about word count. I think it's about, is the book interesting? Do we like it? And people with picture books are making themselves nuts trying to get the word count down, and it's doing themselves a disservice. Better to get it on the page and have it work. And if it feels long to an editor, we'll help you pare it back. But I've worked with so many clients where I'm like, why is the grandmother suddenly showing up? She's so important, and she's, just showed up 3/4 of the way through your picture book, and they're like, well, I had more, but it was over 450 words, so I didn't. I'm like, oh my God. I've been in Holiday House, I'm pushing 3 years now. We have an editorial meeting every week. We have never discussed word count. It has never come out of anybody's mouth in my hearing.
Wow.
It's true.
You blew my mind, and probably a lot of esteemed audiences as well.
I'm sure. I mean, if we think I like this picture book, it seems to go on a little bit. Maybe we could trim it. That could be possible. But I'm not going to read it because it's 650 words instead of the preferred 300 to 500.
Makes perfect sense.
It's crazy.
I just worry that there's some sort of auto reject that happens. So when you get to that, you're into the red zone and word count, and then it's over.
I've heard that. I have heard people say that some people say they won't accept. Is it agents who won't accept more than? And maybe agents know what can sell, but I've never seen it discussed on my end.
Let's talk character. How do we avoid stereotypes, and what makes for an interesting protagonist?
Oh my God, how to avoid stereotypes. All I can say about how to avoid them is that when I'm an editor and I read them, I point it out, and we try to make the character more rich and less cliched. The biggest stereotypes are bullies who I don't like a novel that doesn't have any nuance, and so stereotyped characters can really make it too obvious. But one way to avoid it is to work with an editor. And the other thing is to try to think of everybody as a real character and a real person, and not just a foil, not just a foil that you need in the book for some reason or the other. And I forget your other question, Robert.
Oh, well, you answered it more or less. I want to figure out what's the tip to make an intriguing, well-rounded character?
Well, I just want somebody that honest to God, it all comes down to, has this thing stirred me in my heart in some way, which is like, basically any kid who feels alone on the first day of school, or, oh, here's one. I remember the writer Alan Zadoff, whose new book this season is Wild and Chance, which is really good. But I published Alan's first 3 young adult novels. It was the first things he wrote was after a memoir. And in the first book, which is called Food, Girls, and Other Things I Can't Have, he has an overweight boy in high school. And the opening scene, the boy is gently erasing the tag on his Levi's to try to make it so that people can't read what his waist size is. And then the next morning, he goes off to his first day of high school. And the desks are those kind where the chairs are attached to the desk. And he's standing in the back of homeroom sweating it out because he doesn't know if he's going to fit in his desk. That's not a problem I ever had, but I totally understand the feeling of needing to belong when you're in high school, of not wanting to be embarrassed. So anytime you touch on an emotion that I understand and can relate to, then I think I'm gripped.
That makes sense.
A kid, I mean, how many school stories are there? Andrew Clements wrote a ton of them, but everything happened in school. I never get tired of reading school stories.
And are you?
Every time your parent leaves, and you think the kid isn't. Most kids have 2 living parents, but we still understand the fear of a parent who leaves, or we think isn't going to come back, or doesn't understand you,
And if they could die, it's really convenient for the middle grade author, right? We off those parents early. We don't have to worry about them for the rest of the story.
Yeah, it's true. It is a good narrative device. Yeah.
What about just quick offshoot? But something that makes me chuckle is the death of the parents and James and the giant peach, so James can go live with the evil ants before he gets on the peach. And his parents could be alive. James could just be there for a couple of weeks.
That's so interesting. I never thought about that. Roald Dahl is such a great example. He really understood kids. He wasn't a particularly likable guy. He wasn't, he wasn't known for school visits where, he wasn't like Dan Gutman, who is a complete 10-year-old when you interviewed him, he has the enthusiasms of a 10-year-old. Knows how to speak to kids, but there was something about Roald Dahl. He really understood what kids would think was fun and interesting. And those were the stories that interested him as well. Yeah. And this book, I was just talking about it today. It's Pine Island Home by Polly Horvath. Now, this is the classic premise. There's 4 girls. I don't even remember, because I read it in manuscript, why. Oh, their parents are washed away in a tsunami. That's right. Right at the beginning. So they have to go live with their great Aunt Martha, but when they get there, she's dead. So they wheedle, I love this book, they wheedle a neighbor into saying that he'll be their guardian enough so that they can get by at school or something, but they also pretend that Aunt Martha's alive, and it's basically 4 kids fending for themselves. It's a great premise, it never gets old. I loved it.
Wanted to ask you about theme, because this is a bane of mine, because I'm very guilty of preaching. Because we want to have something at the end of our experience. We want to have a great story. That's primary. But after that, we want to have a little bit of what's it all about. What are we taking away from this? But we don't want to be preachy. So where do you find authors straddling the line between preachiness and having a complete theme that adds up? That if we dissected it in our literature class, we'd say, yes, good job. We could write a paper on this.
My friend Roger Sutton, who I met in Zena Sutherland's children's literature class when I was in college, and he's the editor of the Hornbook magazine and children's book critic.
I saw you were interviewed there about your love of Broadway.
That's right. Roger and I have been discussing this since I was in college. I'm not sure that children's books all hold up to the deeper kind of deconstructing I did in literature classes. I don't mean that they're not valuable and wonderful. I'm not sure there are a lot of writers that hold up to that much. Like I said, that you'd want to write a college paper on one book, maybe if you were studying children's books anyway. But I've also wondered about that because George Bernard Shaw is one of my favorite playwrights. And I've wondered for years, he's so didactic. He always has a political agenda, and his plays are so entertaining. And then I thought, well, he owns it. You know, he's not trying to sneak it in there. He's, you know, Mrs. Warren's Profession. He's writing about how women have to make money, or Major Barbara. He's always always sort of owning his agenda. And I think that's where something becomes didactic. It's when you're trying to preach. I had an argument with my friend, Kathy Petter, about a book that I didn't read, but she was writing her thesis for Vermont College for her master's degree. And there's a book where a grandfather gets he's trapped in a mine, and the family's very poor because he won't allow them to accept any relief. And in her thesis, she said he should have, you know, wouldn't it have been better if when he was in the mine, he had like a change of heart and came out and said, you know, this family's going to be a lot better off if we sign up for welfare. And I was like, what the fuck? Oh, sorry. I was like, that was a terrible idea. But the grandfather is going to suddenly, you know, become a different character and, you know, learn an important lesson. I would puke if I was a kid. I read that. So I think you should just tell your story, and the meaning and satisfaction will take care of itself. That's my philosophy.
Gotcha, but if I want to defend it in a thesis program later, I'll just be high and dry.
Well, give me an example of a book a middle grade novel where you can defend
where you can...
besides Harry Potter, which I think there's 7 books and you could make an argument. But give me another example.
Oh, let's see. Well, Watership Down, I suppose. I don't know for...
Watership Down isn't even considered a children's novel in the United States. Also, could you give me an example that's not from 1974?
Off the top of my head, let's see. Well, sure. They Threw Us Away by previous guest Daniel Krauss.
I haven't read that book. It sounds great.
Oh, it's amazing. I highly recommend it.
Read that.
That's one where the fun keeps, but by God, by the end, the theme does add up. It has the checkpoints.
That sounds terrific. I'm going to look, you know, as soon as I get through A Suitable Boy, which I have a scant 1,100 pages left of, I will look at that.
You know what? I love every book, and I try never to say one's my favorite. That one really just spoke to me because it was about things that I personally loved. So never have favorites. I love every author's book that I ever review or talk to on the show.
Oh,
but that one is really, really excellent.
Oh, thank you. Okay. But it sounds to me like you're saying a few of them hit that mark.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. You know, you put me on. Here's what's terrible, and I hope this is common of more writers than just me, but maybe it's just me and a neurological problem. I know things intensely about books while I'm reading them, but then trying to remember all the little checkpoints. I'll remember the big moments, but trying to go back in my head is spur of the moment. I'm terrible at it.
So my thing is, I'm pretty good at remembering what I've read, especially, which is why I'm able to have the field that I'm in. But there's a writer named Courtney Scheinmel, and I signed up her first books, her first book was Sincerely Sophie, which became Sincerely Sophie and Sincerely Katie. I loved it. Middle grade novel. We had lunch together. I ran into her on the subway, and I thought she was a former intern I'd worked at in another job. I have no visual recognition for people at all. But the only reason that I'm still alive is I remember what they write so well that, like, people forgive me for the fact that, like, I was her editor and I did not recognize her on the subway. It was incredibly embarrassing.
Fair enough.
But I remembered her book, and that's the important thing.
I wanted to also ask, and I'm watching our time slip away, but I want to make sure I also ask about dialogue and description. because obviously when we're writing middle grade, we're writing for children. There, you wouldn't write the same level of description that you would expect from an adult novel, or certainly a longer piece. What is there a good rule of thumb on how much description is enough for a child to have a clear vision of what's going on without needing to know all the finer points of a setting, location, whatever?
Wow, I've never thought about it that way. My rule of thumb is, am I bored? In which case I might ask you to cut some. There's a writer named William Maine. He's probably dead by now. I used to read him when I was in junior high and high school. He's a British author, and it was the era of a lot of money in libraries, so they bought all these well-reviewed British novels that we couldn't sell today. And he had a lot of description, and I read every word, but I couldn't follow it. So I have another thing to say about that. I used to read Harriet the Spy over and over, and I lived in a suburb, Belmont, Massachusetts, and in the beginning of the book, Harriet and Sport are playing town in the courtyard of their building, and there's a tree, and Harriet's drawing the town up, but I had no idea what a courtyard in a New York City building was. I couldn't imagine it, and I always pictured it just happening at my next door neighbor's house because he had a tree in his front yard. And when they went to visit Old Golly on the subway, I imagined that they were going into downtown Boston because it was the only thing I knew with the subway, you know. So I'm not sure how much kids pay a lot of attention. I mean, I think they pick up the atmosphere in the description, but then they kind of project themselves into it to some degree or another anyway.
So no matter how you describe a classroom, they're probably going to imagine their classroom?
More or less, right. You know, you put the hamster cage in if the hamster is going to come into it as part of the story. But yeah, they're really interested in what's going on with the people, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I have got a couple of questions I'm obligated to ask you, and then I've got one last question. So 3 more questions, and we'll call it a night. Does that sound reasonable?
Sure.
Cool. I always want to end while we're still having fun. So a question I've got to ask, esteemed audience knows I have to ask. Elizabeth Law, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
No. And I'm sorry to tell you that I wish ghosts were real, but I don't think that they are, personally.
Flying saucers or ghosts, either one?
I don't have any idea about flying saucers. I've never really thought about it. I hope ghosts are real, but I've never had an experience with one.
Fair enough. And then I've got to ask, I make it my business to ask every publishing professional I have on here about diversity in publishing. That way I'm never picking on anyone, but I would never expect any one person to answer for all of publishing, but publishing has a poor track record with having diverse books. So what are you seeing being done to improve that? What is Holiday House doing? What are you doing?
Well, we're working hard. One of the things that I hope that will happen because of the pandemic is we're going to find a way to bring more people on staff who are more diverse. I think it's particularly hard for young editors from diverse backgrounds because the entry-level positions are terribly paying. And you have to be pretty motivated to really want to work in publishing to tough out those first 4 or 5 years. And we're really we're doing things at Holiday House. We're going to be I'm not on the diversity committee, so I wish I had come prepared with a list of the current actions that we're taking. But I know I'm speaking at one of the traditionally Black colleges. We're also getting on. We volunteered for some mentoring programs. We're really, really trying to put the word out that we want more representation and more own voices representation. We have a long way to go. Like, we love the books that we have, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. I also think with Black Lives Matter that it's opening the door for other minorities to come in as well, and that's what I would love to see. I certainly like to see a Black editor on our staff, at least one, but I'd like to also see other cultures. I read a manuscript by a woman last week who's Persian, and it's a young adult novel, and I'm hoping we can acquire that. And I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a draft for a lot of diversity. And I wish I had more concrete answers, but we're really taking it on pretty seriously because it's way past time. Way past time.
Well, I'm going to sneak in a quick follow-up question then, because you mentioned that now that there's quarantine, you're hoping that will work for folks. And obviously, one barrier is that first 5 years where you're not making that much money, and
right.
You're in one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive cities in the world.
Yeah, it's a huge barrier. Yeah.
Obviously, you've got a great view of New York
right.
that we want to see it before we're out of here. But let's do it right now.
Okay.
While we're
talking about this,
I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I was a vice president at Simon & Schuster when I got this view. I thought, well, the good times will just keep rolling. Here's my book. I told you I have a lot of.
That is beautiful.
That's some of them. That's not all of them. Okay, let's see if I can show New York out here. Let's see. You get that? Wow. Right. It's windows. I wonder if I can get the Chrysler Building. Let's see. That's going to be hard, but we'll try it. I can see it if I stand in a certain corner of my bedroom. So wait. We're talking about. Were you going to
talking about people being able to work from other locations where the cost of living is maybe a little bit lower?
Yep.
And that would allow for just a greater expansion of all sorts of voices that can participate in publishing.
I'm really hoping. I think the time is now. Let's figure out how to do that. How it's got to be worth any. Let's see. See all those lights? Yeah, I really do live in Manhattan.
I have deep apartment envy. That's incredible.
I don't think I'm going to be able to show the Chrysler Building, but that thing with lights on it is not the Chrysler Building. And the thing that's in the middle of your screen right now is on what's called Billionaires Row. I think you can see like 4 lights in various intervals going up it. That's the tallest residential building that's not in Saudi Arabia. It's a pencil building. It's really ugly. And apartments cost like $52 million or something, and it's all owned by Russian oligarchs as far as I can tell. So there you go. That's a little bonus.
Esteemed audience, this is one time that I know it's a podcast and you're listening, but this is one time you're going to want to tune in to YouTube and check this out. You do not want to miss this view.
Wow, thanks. It just looks like a bunch of lights. I'm not sure about that. Okay, I feel bad that we got off a much more important subject than the pretty lights of Manhattan, which is how the hell can we get better representation of the people in our country into publishing houses and into our books.
Yes.
It's a huge priority.
Obviously,
we talk about it at every meeting, and we I wish I could remember what it was I just signed up for, where I'm going to be taking questions, and trying to encourage people who are signing up to talk about how they can get into the field. And we what the other problem is? This can be really interesting. The problem is that traditionally, the format has been you come in as an assistant and then work your way up. But I think if we change that so that people come in as manuscript readers and copywriters and things where you don't have to be there to handle walking to the post office and, all the Xeroxing and stuff like that. If we can make it a more editorial training job, that might be a really good way to begin to bring more diverse people into the publishing scene.
And my last question for you is always some variation of this is almost a lazy question to catch anything that I just didn't have. I didn't think to ask during our time of things we could have covered.
Let's see. I already told people not to worry about word count. That's a very important one. This is my biggest thing. I believe this with all my heart. Well, there's two things I believe. I really completely believe the book is the thing. It doesn't matter who your agent is or what house you land with or who you talk to at a conference. If you've written a book that's a good story or a funny read-aloud picture book or a good nonfiction picture book biography or a topic that somebody is going to find that and understand why it's good, and they're going to publish it and it will work. The book always rises to the top. And the other thing is, this isn't as important now, but when social media was first burgeoning, shy people were being tortured because they were like, oh my God, I just want to write my book and now I have to tweet and go on Facebook and post pictures of my children. And I used to say this, I still think it's true. I would rather publish a good book by a hermit covered in oozing sores who never left his closet than a bad book by a chatty, gregarious self-promoter, because the first one will sell better. The book that's going to sell is the one that is better to read.
Why is that, you think?
Because we like to read. We're not buying a book because the author is charismatic. I mean, if you go to see the person speak, you'll buy their book. But you're only going to keep buying their books if you loved reading that first one. And you're only going to recommend the one to your friends that you liked. You know, there's lots of little books that somebody loved and took a chance on that became popular because they were really good. And there's lots of books that publishers spend a lot of money on and position and tee up, and they never go anywhere.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Elizabeth,
thank you so much for having me. I hope we can talk about you and your writing sometime, because I didn't ask any questions about you because I thought I wasn't supposed to, but let's do that.
You can head with esteemed audience to middlegradeninja.com. I am shameless at self-promoting. You'll learn everything you ever want to know. Remind esteemed audience where they can find you online and follow you on Twitter to get you over that 13,000 count again.
So I'm working on 13,000. Thank you, Robert. It's eLaw Reads. eLaw Reads is my Twitter handle. elawreads.com is my website, and I have an Instagram account too, but I'm not on it as much because I'm super verbal and less visual. Although I do post a lot of pictures of New York because I walk around a lot in the pandemic.
Well, my God, where you're living, you got the Chrysler Building right there. Spider-Man swings by, you're going to see it.
I actually have the Roosevelt Island tram going by outside my window. So if we ever do this again, we'll take a picture of the tram going by. It's fun.
I would love to do this again. You are welcome back anytime, and you can sit right there in front of the window, and we'll watch you. We'll watch New York. We'll have
the tram. It's a lot of fun. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Good luck, everybody. Write your hearts out. That's what matters.
Esteemed audience, thanks so much for tuning in. Catch up download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.